The mother and son were attending a wedding. Suddenly, a guest behind them was shot in the head by a shooter. The guests panicked and ran in all directions, but the mother, Julie, remained unusually calm. She quickly judged that the killer was hiding at a high vantage point and using a sniper rifle. She told her son Edward to keep his body as low as possible, avoid vital areas, and silently count the number of shots. Edward could not understand how his mother could stay so composed in the middle of gunfire, and even take the risk to lift her head and look for the shooter's position. What he did not know was that his mother, Julie, had once been a retired professional assassin. Before she could fight back, she first had to make sure her son was safe. Guests kept falling into pools of blood, and Julie noticed a pattern. The shooter needed to reload after every 5 shots, and the reload time was about 8 seconds. Although Edward was filled with questions, his survival instinct made him follow his mother's instructions. After confirming that her son was temporarily safe, Julie immediately took action. The killer was hiding on a distant hillside. She had no suitable long-range weapon at hand and could only approach the target by using cover. And the premise for all of this was that she needed to find a vehicle. Julie quickly leaped toward a corpse and searched the blood-soaked pockets for car keys, but by the time she found the keys, it was already too late to stay hidden. Luckily, the dead guest shielded her from all the bullets. After the 5th shot rang out, Julie seized the precious 8 seconds and successfully started the car. She drove toward the killer's position on the hill while enduring bullets hitting the vehicle. At that moment, a bullet shattered the car window. In the violent impact, Julie lost consciousness. The cautious killer did not let his guard down and slowly approached the wreck with a handgun, preparing to finish the job. However, he underestimated Julie, and Julie's 30 years of experience as an assassin were far from an empty reputation. When the killer fell, there was no joy of victory on Julie's face. Facing her son's confused expression as he rushed over, she explained that she knew this killer and that he had come for her. Their top priority now was to escape as quickly as possible. She knew very well how assassin organizations operated, and a failed attempt would inevitably bring more killers. By this time, the wedding venue at the foot of the hill had become a blood-soaked tragedy. The celebration had turned into mourning, and the bride had become a widow on her wedding day. While the survivors were still in shock, several uninvited guests dressed in black entered the venue, claiming to be Interpol officers searching for a British woman. The elderly doctor at the scene felt something was wrong because he had just called the local police, yet they had not arrived, and instead so-called Interpol agents appeared with an unusually fast response. Just as he asked to check their documents again, the guests who had narrowly survived the first attack had no time to breathe before facing another ruthless slaughter. Screams echoed through the air, and blood stained the entire lawn. Afonso grabbed an elderly man who had collapsed on the ground and asked again where the British woman was. The old man trembled as he pointed toward a small cabin on the hillside, his cloudy eyes filled with pleading. But the only response he received was a cold gunshot. When the slaughter finally ended, only one lucky witness remained alive. In the world of killers, retirement had always been an illusion because no one ever left the profession alive. However, Julie was an exception. 30 years ago, an accident had resulted in her pregnancy with Edward. To give her child a stable environment, she hid her identity and worked hard for 30 years, finally saving enough money to retire. But like many children from single-parent families, the grown-up Edward was determined to find out the truth about his father. This time, during their vacation on the island, Edward finally gathered the courage to ask his mother about his father. But Julie always avoided the topic on purpose, and she simply advised her son to enjoy the holiday because his father was not a good man, and she did not want him appearing in their lives. Edward was desperate to know who his father was because he was about to get married and hoped to receive blessings from both parents at the wedding. At that moment, the phone inside the house suddenly rang. To Julie's surprise, it was a new mission from the assassin organization. She intended to refuse, but the offer was hard to turn down, as it was 3 times the usual price. Thinking about her son's upcoming wedding expenses, Julie hesitated. Late at night, she opened a hidden compartment under the bed and retrieved the long-stored equipment. The person on the other end of the line was right. She truly missed the thrill of dancing on the edge of danger. The target for this mission was a young girl on a yacht near the coast, which seemed easy. But Julie's professional instinct told her it would not be simple, especially because the voice on the phone sounded completely different from the one in her memory. When she called again to question it, the person calmly admitted that assassins were merely pieces on a chessboard, so there was no need to ask who was pulling the strings. Julie immediately decided to abandon the mission because she realized that something had changed inside the assassin organization. However, the organization's retaliation came far more brutally than she had imagined. Her top priority was to escape the island with her son. Soon, the group of men in black broke into their home. But Julie had already taken her son and escaped through the backyard on a motorcycle. However, almost all the island's residents had died at the wedding, and they could not find a single boat to escape with. Julie suddenly remembered the yacht offshore that belonged to her mission target, so she rode the motorcycle straight toward the dock. When they arrived at the dock, the killers chasing them also arrived in their cars. Seeing his mother and the only remaining survivor jump into the sea, Edward had no choice but to follow her desperate escape plan. Half an hour later, they reached the yacht. However, the target girl was shocked when she saw Edward.
This is Kayla, my fiancée. Hi. Hi.
As the yacht departed from the island, a killer drove a jet ski toward them and climbed aboard. Sean had once been Julie's partner, and he brought terrible news. Her name was now on the organization's bounty list. He claimed he came as a friend to warn her. To show his sincerity, he put his weapon away. This gesture slightly eased the tension between them. He told Julie that she might be in serious trouble and that the situation was far worse than she imagined. According to him, their contact in the assassin organization, Damien, might already be dead, because there had been no communication for 4 days. Julie stayed alert and did not want her son, Edward, to get too close to Sean, because in her eyes, this former colleague was nothing but greedy and reckless. However, given the circumstances, she could only fabricate a lie, claiming that terrorists had attacked the island and she had no choice but to bring this friend aboard to take shelter. Edward's fiancée Kayla believed the story and warmly welcomed the unexpected guest. Just when everything seemed calm, Sean's phone suddenly received a text message, and his expression immediately froze. This tiny change did not escape Julie's sharp gaze. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the fire alarm on the yacht went off without warning. Kayla's brother Ezra thought it was a system malfunction. Only Julie knew that Sean had created this as a chance to speak to her alone. They ran into each other in the kitchen. After a clever distraction, Julie precisely knocked the weapon out of Sean's hand. The bond between killers proved to be fragile after all.
The contract on you's gone wide, price has tripled, so...
While Julie and Sean fought fiercely in the kitchen, the people in the cabin were still wondering where they had gone. Edward even naively believed that his mother was secretly meeting an old lover and was deliberately avoiding him. He had no idea that Julie was being choked by Sean with all his strength. As the suffocation grew stronger, Julie's fingertips touched the fallen cheese fork, and she did not hesitate to stab it fiercely into Sean's body. After dealing with Sean, Julie, covered in blood, returned to the cabin. Edward finally realized that his mother's relationship with Sean was nothing like what he imagined. Facing everyone's confused eyes, Julie had no choice but to confess her identity as an assassin and explain why they were being hunted. She had refused to carry out the organization's mission to kill Kayla. Kayla was stunned when she learned she had been a target. If Julie had not accepted the mission and then chosen to abandon it, Kayla might have already lost her life to another killer. But what she could not understand was why she had been targeted. Because she had always done charity work and had never made enemies. Julie insisted on finding the mastermind, otherwise they would never have peace. She decided to go to Albania to find their former contact and hoped he could revoke the bounty. As she prepared to shower, Julie unexpectedly overheard Ezra's phone conversation. It turned out that he was the one who issued the order to kill his sister. Blinded by greed, the young man believed his sister's charity work was wasting the family fortune, so he recklessly hired assassins. Despite the betrayal, the kind-hearted Kayla eventually forgave her brother. However, even though the assassination request had been canceled, the organization's pursuit of Julie did not stop. Far away in London, another female assassin had already accepted the bounty. What made things more unsettling was that this woman, who had known Julie for many years, not only understood Julie's secrets, but also knew the true identity of Edward's father. When Julie and the others arrived at Damien's home in Albania, they were greeted only by the wide-open door and walls covered with blood. Judging from the traces of struggle, Julie was certain that Damien had likely been the one who won the fight. What mattered now was finding his laptop, because it might contain crucial information about the hunters. Just when their search yielded nothing, a neighbor downstairs handed over a local newspaper. It reported that a body suspected to be Damien's had been found in a nearby river. Julie immediately took her son and daughter-in-law to the morgue. After they sneaked in, they lifted the white sheet covering the body. Julie only took one look at the man's bare lower body and instantly confirmed that the deceased was not Damien. Standing beside her, Edward had a complicated expression because he had just accepted that his mother was an assassin, and now he learned that her romantic history was so complicated that he became even more confused about who his father was. At that moment, the corpse's arm suddenly slipped down, revealing the tattoo on it. Kayla sharply noticed that someone was approaching. They hurriedly escaped from the scene. With Luca's skillful driving, they managed to lose the pursuing police, but the vehicle broke down on the roadside from the strain. While Julie and Luca went to buy car parts, Edward finally confessed a cruel truth to Kayla. The romantic tennis encounter they believed in was actually a carefully planned lie. It turned out that last year, someone had left Edward a large amount of money under the name of a trust fund, and he suspected it had been left by his biological father. While tracking the origin of the money, he discovered secret financial connections between it and Kayla's father's company. Although he eventually fell in love with Kayla for real, a relationship built on lies could never withstand the truth. Kayla felt as if lightning had struck her, because what she believed to be fate turned out to be a calculated deception. Heartbroken, she angrily walked away on her own. Edward sank into the pain of heartbreak. But in that despair, a sudden realization struck him. He realized that the Latin tattoo on the corpse was not done at random, but was a carefully designed coordinate code. Combined with modern phone location functions, it was clearly a secret message Damien had left for Julie. This discovery reignited hope among them. After repairing the car, they immediately set off for the location indicated by the coordinates. In a deep forest, they found the abandoned wooden cabin. With her experience, Julie did not rush forward, but carefully examined the ground. Soon, she discovered a concealed wire hidden in the grass. The moment she touched it, a barrage of gunfire shot from all directions. It proved her caution was justified because Damien was indeed alive and extremely alert. When Edward saw how closely his mother and Damien reunited, he once again felt a strong impulse to believe Damien might be his father. However, from their interactions, Damien was clearly only one of Julie's many former lovers. According to Damien, a few days earlier, 2 mercenaries had shown up and threatened him to reveal Julie's whereabouts. As the organization's contact, Damien was also skilled, and he managed to kill one of them on the spot. But the notebook containing crucial mission logs was stolen by the other man. That man likely used the notebook to send Julie a fake mission and then issued a bounty on her to all the killers. To help Julie's family escape, Damien suggested arranging new identities for them so they could start fresh somewhere no one knew them. However, Luca strongly opposed this suggestion. Thinking about the many friends and loved ones who died on the island at the killer's hands, he insisted that the mastermind must pay for what they had done. Unexpectedly, Julie chose to accept the escape plan. As a retired assassin, she was willing to agree to anything as long as her son's safety could be guaranteed. The argument ended unhappily. Luca drove away alone in anger. That night, when Julie was resting with her eyes closed, a cold gun barrel suddenly pressed against her temple. It turned out the so-called threat of hunters was just a deception, and Damien had been the one who betrayed Julie to the organization. The staged fake death and the coordinate puzzle had been traps designed to make her lower her guard. Damien spoke with greed in his voice and told her not to blame an old friend, because the bounty this time was simply too tempting. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, a clumsy loading sound came from the other side of the room. But it was obvious that Edward had never held a gun before, because he was trembling uncontrollably. After he fired, the bullet hit a bucket several meters away instead of Damien. Damien showed a look of disbelief, because as the son of Julie and that man, such poor aim was almost absurd. Damien's moment of distraction gave Julie the chance she needed, and she suddenly clamped his waist tightly with her legs. In the end, Julie managed to take the weapon from him. Damien tried to explain that he had only been joking with her. His explanation was met with the sound of a gunshot. Damien explained in pain that the bounty would only be canceled if the target died, and that instead of letting someone else take it, it was better to let an old friend earn the money. According to Julie's usual way of handling things, she would never leave someone alive. However, with Edward's pleas, a crack finally appeared in her cold-blooded resolve. In an unprecedented decision, Julie spared Damien, the man who had betrayed her, and left Albania with her son under the cover of night. Once they reached a safe place, Julie began teaching Edward how to shoot, but he almost shot her by accident, frightening the battle-hardened woman so much that she broke into a cold sweat. She forced herself to remain calm and told him to relax, teaching him to breathe deeply before trying to aim again. However, Edward was no longer focused on marksmanship. Damien's words about the bounty being canceled only when the target died kept echoing in his mind. He did not want to live a life on the run like his mother, and he could not accept that she had brought danger into his life. During their heated argument, Edward admitted that he wanted to leave his mother and try to repair his relationship with Kayla. Facing her son's determination, Julie could only vent her anger on the shooting range. Edward went to a public phone booth on the street to contact Kayla, but found that he needed coins. He entered a nearby restaurant and asked the owner to borrow the landline. When the call connected, Kayla hung up the moment she heard his voice. And Ezra revealed that Kayla was in danger because of a mysterious email and had arranged an online conversation with an insider at 5 o'clock to discuss the email's contents. Edward could not let go of any chance to save their relationship, so he agreed to offer help. But when he hung up the phone, he noticed the restaurant owner nervously glancing at him while quietly making a call. Edward turned his head toward the news playing on the television and finally realized that he and his mother had become fugitives in the wedding shooting case. In panic, he rushed out of the restaurant and saw that the police had already blocked all the roads. He fled through narrow alleys, stumbled into a crowded market without thinking, and got lost among the maze of stalls, eventually being forced into a dead end. The police shouts grew closer and closer. In desperation, he spotted a rusty metal wall, pulled it open with all his strength, and slipped into an abandoned building. Edward climbed the stairs upward. However, the police still discovered his trail. Heavy boots echoed through the stairwell. He was driven all the way to the rooftop. Edward looked around, and the only way out was the roof of the neighboring building more than 2 meters away. He stepped back a few paces to run, and as the police burst through the door, he leaped out. After landing, he quickly hid behind a low wall. The police searched the opposite rooftop, but eventually had no choice but to leave. Only when the sirens faded into the distance did Edward finally breathe a sigh of relief. Back at the residence, Edward and his mother held each other tightly. Julie insisted that they should keep hiding, but Edward was determined to salvage his marriage. At 5 o'clock sharp, Edward joined the three-way call. The person on the phone was Jasper, the former technical director of Kayla's father's company. He had accidentally discovered a shocking secret in the company's emails and sent it to an unsuspecting Kayla, hoping to extort money. But he was imprisoned in Libya for committing crimes, which made Kayla unable to reach him. In prison, Jasper was bullied and even had 4 of his fingers cut off by an inmate. Only when Kayla's father Aaron used his connections was Jasper secretly taken out by prison guards. However, fear made him flee before the rescue helicopter even landed. Aaron immediately sent people to hunt Jasper down, because the secret in the email threatened the survival of his mining empire. Kayla's brother had never been valued by their father and desperately wanted to prove himself. And Kayla focused on charity work and spent the rest of her time immersed in her relationship with Edward. After learning of her father's secret letter, the siblings began their own investigations. But what Ezra did not know was that he had already fallen under the control of a mysterious woman who called herself Marie. Marie blended into Aaron's family gathering under the guise of a philanthropist, successfully seduced him, and used him to track down Julie and her son. Now the terrified Jasper feared being silenced by Aaron, but also wanted to profit from the siblings using the secret. Because of the distance, Ezra asked Edward to act as the middleman and meet Jasper in person. But Edward had no idea that right after they hung up, Ezra proudly revealed the meeting time and location to Marie. Meanwhile, Kayla had begun acting on her own. She secretly mixed sleeping powder into her father's whiskey and watched him fall asleep on the leather sofa not long after drinking it. Kayla quietly searched his jacket and finally found the letter in the inner pocket. When she finished reading the contents of the letter, her hands trembled uncontrollably. It turned out her mother's death by suicide had an unspeakable connection to her father. The next morning, Aaron woke from his daze and immediately reached for his jacket pocket. When he discovered that the letter had disappeared, his expression changed instantly. This long-buried secret had finally been exposed. At that moment, Edward was waiting for Jasper in the central square of Athens. A man wearing sunglasses and looking nervous arrived, as promised. When he learned Edward had not brought any money, Jasper's expression changed, and he pulled out a sharp knife, warning that without money Edward would get no information. As the two were locked in a standoff, Julie sharply noticed an unusual movement from a sanitation worker not far away. The woman pretended to empty a trash bin but reached into the bottom and pulled out a silenced handgun. Julie fired decisively and wounded the killer's shoulder. But in the chaos, Edward followed Jasper into a nearby alley and ran. And the female killer, wounded as she was, continued to chase them. Despite her shoulder injury, the killer refused to give up and pursued the targets while calling for backup. Edward and Jasper blindly dashed into the underground parking garage of a park. The killers who arrived began a sweep of the garage with their weapons drawn. Julie moved like a shadow between the cars and swiftly took down 2 killers. However, a third killer spotted her ambush through a rearview mirror. They fought intensely on the concrete floor. Julie used all her strength to pin him down, but then realized at a critical moment that her gun was out of bullets. Quick-witted, she grabbed a broken beer bottle from the ground and slashed across the attacker's throat with precision. Just as Edward was moving Jasper to another location, a killer suddenly extended a leg and tripped them. At the critical moment, Julie appeared once more to save them. At that moment, the cleaning worker assassin finally arrived and began a fierce gunfight with Julie inside the parking garage. Julie signaled her son to take Jasper and leave first while she stayed behind to cover them. However, 30 years without using a gun had affected her accuracy, and with one mistake her handgun was knocked to the ground by the female assassin. When Edward and the informant fled in panic toward the parking lot exit, the female assassin who took a shortcut had already blocked their path. A black car suddenly sped forward and slammed into the female assassin, sending her flying. Marie, sitting in the driver's seat, claimed she was backup sent by Julie. Edward was still hesitant, but seeing the injured female assassin struggling to get up, he had no choice but to get in the car. Marie stepped hard on the gas pedal, and the wheels mercilessly rolled over the female assassin. When Julie finished dealing with her opponent and arrived, all she saw were the distant taillights of the departing car. She picked up the vibrating phone from the female assassin's body and shouted into the receiver, demanding to know who the caller was and where they were taking her son. Ezra hung up the phone in terror, his hands trembling uncontrollably because he had wanted to prove his ability to his father, but had instead put Edward in danger. And Edward, who had been taken by Marie, was even more shocked because this mysterious woman claimed she was his aunt. This made him even more eager to know the identity of his biological father. Under Julie's harsh questioning, Jasper finally broke down and revealed the truth. As the former technical director of Aaron's company, he had once come across a special name mentioned in an email and tried to use it to extort money. But he committed crimes in Libya and was imprisoned. And after suffering abuse in jail, he threatened Aaron that if he was not rescued, he would expose the secret name. But in reality, he himself did not know what the name meant and had only been bluffing. Just as Julie was about to deal with the liar, her phone suddenly rang. The caller was Luca, who had escaped the island with them earlier. Luca had seen on the news that Julie and her son were framed as the perpetrators of the wedding massacre, and thinking of the friends who had died, he immediately drove back to Albania for revenge. He found the recovering Damien and used brutal methods to force information about the assassin organization out of him, but Damien refused to say a word. Luca had no choice but to bring his laptop and seek Julie's help. Coincidentally, Jasper was a computer expert, so Julie took him to Luca's home. To save his life, Jasper began decrypting the files on the laptop, but after he succeeded, he suddenly turned on them and demanded money in exchange for not deleting the files. Luca's mother reacted quickly and knocked Jasper out with a frying pan. While they were focused on checking the classified files, Kayla suddenly called. Through her father, Aaron, she finally learned the origin of the mysterious name, which on the surface was the name of her mother's pet dog, but was actually the code Aaron and his wife used when contacting the assassin organization. It turned out that many years ago, when the company faced bankruptcy, Aaron and his wife took the risk of making black market deals with arms dealers. Afterwards, to escape their control, they hired professional killers to eliminate them. After confessing everything, Aaron took drugs and ended his life. Ezra also admitted to his sister that, wanting to prove his ability to their father, he had helped Marie plan the murders, and Marie claimed she was Edward's aunt. Hearing this, Julie suddenly remembered the assassination record she saw in the decrypted files. In 1994, she had been hired by the Cross family to assassinate the arms dealer. After she completed the task, she discovered too late that the target's family members had been in the room. At that moment, Julie received a photo of her kidnapped son, and the sender instructed her to go to the arms dealer's old mansion from that year. Facing Kayla's questions, Julie finally revealed the secret buried for decades. The woman who took Edward, Marie, was most likely Edward's biological mother. Julie and Luca immediately flew to Spain. After landing, she received a full load of weapons from an old friend, clearly another resource left behind from one of her past romances. Meanwhile, Edward regained consciousness and found himself inside a luxurious villa. Marie told Edward that this was his true home and revealed the truth behind the entire revenge plan. 30 years ago, Aaron hired killers to eliminate his biological father, and the assassin who carried out the task was Julie. Tonight, she would personally bring this revenge to an end. As night fell, Julie quietly began her rescue mission. She swiftly climbed over the high wall, but found a room filled with photos of Edward, proving the kidnapping had been planned for a long time. What shocked her even more was that the walls displayed a comic-style record of the assassination that had changed everyone's fate. Meanwhile, in the mansion's basement, Marie stared at Edward and slowly revealed the long-buried past. That night, her husband was working at his desk, but Julie's bullet had already pierced his heart. When Marie rushed in after hearing the noise, she only had time to see her husband collapsing in a pool of blood before she was knocked unconscious. In her fading consciousness, She vaguely heard the cry of a baby, and when she woke up again, the child had disappeared along with the assassin. Edward's real name was Florent. She pointed out that Edward looked exactly like her late husband when he was young, and she was not an aunt at all, but his true biological mother. She had been searching for her son for 30 long years. It was her drawings that supported her through all those years. At that moment, Afonso suddenly noticed that several surveillance screens had gone dark at the same time. It was clear that Julie had successfully infiltrated the estate. When Afonso went to intercept her as ordered, Edward took the opportunity to knock Marie down and tried to escape from the mansion. Julie fought her way through the guards and reached the basement. In the moment mother and son reunited, Edward urgently asked Julie whether she had killed his biological father. The truth was far more complicated than he imagined. Julie admitted that she had indeed been the assassin who carried out the hit on the arms dealer, but the man had been far from innocent. When she heard the baby crying, a sudden urge to protect him overwhelmed her, and she chose to take the child to a hidden island and spend the rest of her life atoning. However, this entire conversation was clearly heard by Marie behind the surveillance monitors. She exposed another cruel truth. Edward had actually been born through surrogacy for the arms dealer, and she had never fulfilled even a single day of maternal responsibility. Edward felt dizzy from the drugs and the blow of the truth. All exits were blocked, and they had no choice but to find another way out. Julie decisively detonated the explosives she had planted in advance. The violent explosion drew all the security personnel away. She took the opportunity to seize Marie as a hostage. However, a strange smile appeared on Marie's face as she calmly announced that Edward did not have much time left. It turned out that the drug she injected into Edward contained toxins, and he had to reach a hospital within a certain period of time to survive. If they wanted her to save him, it was simple. Edward only needed to kill Julie himself to avenge his father. Julie handed her pistol to Edward without hesitation. For many years she had treated the boy as her own, and if she were to die by Edward's hand, it would be a form of release for her. It was the debt she had never been able to repay. Meanwhile, Kayla led a team of elite guards to assault the mansion. The well-trained security personnel were forced to retreat under heavy fire. Luca finally captured Afonso, the man responsible for the bloody wedding massacre, but he hesitated at the final moment of revenge. When Edward's trembling gun aimed at Julie's temple, he suddenly turned the barrel and fired at Marie instead. In that decisive choice, he showed that he would rather die from the toxins than harm the mother who had raised him for so many years. Fortunately, Kayla called for a rescue helicopter and rushed him to the nearest hospital. Watching the helicopter carry Edward away, Luca quietly tightened his grip on Julie's hand. 3 months later, Ezra finally fulfilled his wish and became chairman of the corporation. And after recovering, Edward boarded his fiancée's luxury cruise ship to Greece, beginning a journey with Julie to find his surrogate mother.